Welcome to Compelling Topics, the only channel dedicated to the perspective of leading researchers from the Italian independent scene. Let's turn your minds on. In the vast ocean of human memory, there are stories that refuse to disappear. Fragments of a forgotten world, echoes of a civilization that, according to ancient voices, existed long before the dawn of recorded history. A world of islands now lost beneath the sea, of powerful kingdoms, of knowledge that seems to belong to another age entirely. For centuries, the legend of Atlantis has been confined to the pages of Plato, treated as myth, allegory, or philosophical invention. In this episode, we follow the research of Nicola Bizzi, who brings to light a collection of obscure and controversial texts, documents that describe, in astonishing detail, a lost civilization spanning the Atlantic, its rise to power, and its sudden disappearance in a cataclysm that may have reshaped the entire planet. This is not just the story of Atlantis. This is the story of a world that may have existed before history itself. Over the course of a dense and carefully structured exposition, Nicola Bizzi tackles one of the most fascinating and controversial subjects of ancient history: the existence of Atlantis and the possibility that previously unknown historical sources may shed new light on this lost civilization. The starting point is a consideration now shared by many scholars. Plato is not the only source to speak of Atlantis. While the great Greek philosopher, in the dialogues Timaeus and Critias, passed down to posterity the most well-known account of this vanished civilization, placing it roughly 9,000 years before his own time. It is equally true that other testimonies exist, some partially known and others now lost, which either predate or run parallel to the Platonic narrative. Among these, Bizzi mentions, for instance, the Voyage to Atlantis by Dionysius of Miletus, a work written a century before Plato and now lost. However, the true core of his presentation lies in an entirely different body of texts, which remained in obscurity for centuries. These texts, transmitted over time by the Eleusinian Mystery schools, are not religious or strictly initiatory works. Rather, they constitute a collection of historical and narrative documents preserved and copied across many generations. Bizzi carefully emphasizes that these writings do not represent scientific proof. They have undergone numerous transcriptions and reproductions, with the oldest surviving versions dating back to the 9th century, while many others belong to the 19th or early 20th century. Nevertheless, their content is extraordinarily rich in historical, geographical, and ethnographic detail, offering potential answers to questions that official historiography has long left unresolved. According to Bizzi, these texts amount to thousands of pages describing in remarkable detail the society of a civilization that predates the known historical cycle, a civilization that flourished before a catastrophic planetary event. He further explains that he gained access to these materials in the 1990s through his direct involvement with the Eleusinian Mystery School tradition, and that only recently has their publication been authorized, after decades of internal secrecy. The texts are attributed to two authors who are said to have lived approximately 12,000 years ago, Weliel of the House of Wells and Rasmiel of the House of Phania, the latter even connected to the ruling lineage. Both are described as either direct witnesses or close descendants of witnesses to the civilization they recount. Significantly, these authors never use the term Atlantis. Instead, they describe a group of lands referred to as the Seven Great Islands or Lands of the Western Sea, geographically located in the North Atlantic Ocean. The world they portray was physically different from our own. Sea levels were significantly lower than today, and according to the theories of Charles Hapgood, explicitly referenced by Bizzi, the cataclysms occurring between 10,800 and 9,600 BC caused a displacement of the Earth's crust and a repositioning of the poles. At that time, the North Pole would have been located where Hudson Bay lies today, drastically altering latitudes, longitudes, and the configuration of coastlines across the planet. The principal territory described in the Eleusinian texts is a vast continental landmass that Bizzi refers to as In or Hen, situated west of the present-day Strait of Gibraltar and the Iberian Peninsula. Before reaching it, however, the texts describe an intermediate archipelago, the Hesperides, also located west of Gibraltar. Beyond these islands extended the great land of On, whose surface area is said to have exceeded that of France and Spain combined. This land was inhabited by populations with Mediterranean features, olive skin and dark hair, initially organized into tribes often in conflict with one another, and later unified during a long pre-dynastic phase into three distinct kingdoms. The chronology proposed by the texts is precise. The civilization would have originated around 19,000 BCE, beginning with a primordial phase of development through stilt dwellings, huts, villages, and the discovery of agriculture, eventually leading, around 15,000 BCE, to the emergence of three historical kingdoms. The names of these kingdoms are particularly intriguing. The first is called Enos Sigio, which can be translated as Poseidon. The second is Hengtun. The third, the northernmost, is named Atlantivia, a term rendered in the texts as the Great Mother who came from the sea. In the original language, described in the text with detailed syntactic and grammatical notes, this name is composed of hieroglyphs with precise meanings. It is precisely in this term that Bizzi identifies the most direct correspondence with the word Atlantis used by Plato, as well as with the mythical Aslan of Mesoamerican traditions. Surrounding it were other great lands. To the north lay a vast island continent called Arius, even larger than In itself, inhabited by nomadic populations with red hair, characterized by a patriarchal and warlike nature, lacking permanent cities and organized into large itinerant caravans, a civilization significantly more primitive than that of the southern continent. To the northeast, in the direction of the British Isles, was the island known as Asir, inhabited by populations described as exhibiting albinism, with extremely pale skin and white hair. To the west of Un and Arius stretched Vanir, a great island extending toward the Gulf of Mexico, inhabited by blonde, warlike populations organized according to a matriarchal social structure. Bizzi highlights the striking similarity between these names, Asir and Vanir, and the deities of Norse and Germanic mythology, in which the Asir and Vanir are two divine lineages that clash in an epic battle in remote antiquity. In his view, such a correspondence cannot be merely coincidental. Further to the north lay Trituno, an island whose inhabitants, also fair-haired, possessed a strong maritime and exploratory vocation, capable of building ships able to cross the ocean. Its geographical placement is particularly significant. The text located in correspondence with what is now Libya and Tunisia, in the region of Lake Triton, the same lake mentioned by Apollodorus as the origin of the Tritogenian people. According to those Greek accounts, when the lake began to dry up due to climatic changes, this population migrated to Attica, and their queen would become none other than the goddess Athena. In the Hellenic tradition, she would later be reinterpreted as the daughter of Zeus, yet her roots would lie in a precise historical migration. Finally, the text mentioned two minor islands. The first is Thule or Tuia, a small island at the extreme north, comparable in size to Corsica, said to have been inhabited not by human beings, but by a small, peaceful people of very short stature, echoing the traditions of elves and fair folk. The second is Afton or Hyperborea, an island to the east of Thule, likewise inhabited by beings not attributable to Homo sapiens. Both islands, according to the texts, were placed under the protection of the dominant population of En, functioning as a kind of safeguarded territory meant to preserve these non-human communities. The narrative of the Eleusinian texts reaches its turning point in the Wars of Unification. The kingdom of Enos Sigio prevails over the other two kingdoms of En and initiates a gradual process of conquest across all the great islands of the North Atlantic. It first subdues Arius, then brings the populations of Vanir and Trituno under its control. In this way, the Enic civilization establishes itself as the dominant power across the entire Atlantic archipelago. Its social structure was rooted in matriarchy, with warrior queens and high priestesses in command, at least among the populations of En, Aser, and Vanir, while the peoples of Arius maintained a patriarchal and warlike organization. The dynasty leading this expansion is referred to in the texts as Fania, whose emblem was the silver lion. Nicola Bizzi carefully describes the level of development achieved by this civilization, emphasizing that it was not the technologically futuristic society imagined by many authors of alternative archaeology or science fiction. The Enic civilization was advanced, but in a sense comparable to what would later be achieved by the Roman Empire at its height. It fought with swords, spears, and shields. It possessed powerful war machines. It understood astronomy. It was capable of mapping the entire planet, and it held extensive knowledge in mathematics, science, medicine, and agriculture. Yet it did not possess modern technology. It excelled, however, in urban planning and monumental architecture, particularly in the construction of pyramidal structures. According to these texts, the pyramid itself would have originated in En as a symbolic attempt to unite heaven and earth, later spreading, through Enic civilization, to the Americas, Europe, and Asia. The expansion into the wider world followed complex routes. The populations of Vanir and Trituno, endowed with great nautical skill, had already reached Central and South America before the Enos Sigii themselves, leaving behind a cultural imprint that Bizzi tentatively associates with the presence, among certain pre-Columbian peoples, of deities bearing names similar to those of Norse tradition, a coincidence that has long puzzled anthropologists and linguists. Subsequently, the Enic civilization would have conquered vast territories across both the Western and Eastern hemispheres, Central and South America, North Africa, the Mediterranean basin, the Near East, and Southern Europe, carrying with it customs, traditions, and architectural knowledge across immense distances. All of this unfolded in a world radically different from our own. Geologists have calculated that at the end of the so-called Younger Dryas, the brief ice age lasting between 10,800 and 9,600 BCE, a period that coincides with the two great cometary impacts referenced in the texts, ocean levels were significantly lower than today. In that archaic Europe, Malta was connected to Sicily. Much of the Adriatic Sea was dry land. The Po River flowed into the sea roughly at the latitude of modern Abruzzo, and the North Sea did not yet exist. Great Britain, Ireland, and Norway were connected to the European continent by vast plains rich in pasture and arable land. Sardinia was likely connected to Corsica and Tuscany, while the Aegean Sea was much smaller, with larger islands. Underwater archaeological evidence, Bizzi notes, supports this reconstruction. Within this context, the Inuk civilization would have colonized an Egypt that was not uninhabited. The texts describe how the region was already populated by indigenous peoples, led by descendants of ancient settlers from Phoenicia and Atlantia, two other territories of In, who had established themselves there as early as 15,000 BC. The solar deity Ra, worshipped in ancient Egypt, would find its origin in the Poseidon of In, where a homonymous solar deity was already venerated. The Inuk conquest of Egypt, around 12,000 BCE under the Phoenician dynasty, would thus have overlapped with a cultural and religious substratum already deeply shaped by influences from those same lands of origin. To this phase would also belong the construction of the Sphinx, indeed, of two sphinxes. One is the well-known monument on the Giza Plateau. The other, according to the texts, remains buried beneath a hill on the same plateau, in an area that has never been excavated, despite excavation rights having been granted to an American university as early as the first half of the 20th century, without any actual digs being carried out. The visible Sphinx shows a body deeply eroded not by wind or sand, but by torrential rainfall, as geological studies have suggested. Since the Giza Plateau has been desert for at least 5,000 years, such erosion must predate that period, belonging to an era of subtropical climate with frequent rains. The same, according to Bizzi, would apply to many temples and megalithic structures of ancient Egypt, such as the Serapeum of Abydos and the Valley Temple, and likely even to the pyramids themselves. Completing this picture is one of the most daring engineering feats attributed to the Inuk civilization, the opening of a navigable channel where the Strait of Gibraltar now lies, allowing the Atlantic Ocean to flow into what was then a vast inland lake, gradually transforming it into the Mediterranean Sea as we know it today. One of the most fascinating aspects of the narrative concerns the capital of On. The Eleusinian texts call it Hatlan-Tiv-Hesh, a name that, when analyzed, would mean the Great Mother descended from the stars, Hat for great, Tiv for mother or female, and Hesh for stars. It was a vast metropolis, first the capital of the kingdom of Enos Sigio and later of the entire En. According to Bizzi, its description strikingly corresponds to the capital of Atlantis described by Plato in the Timaeus and Critias. Plato, in turn, had inherited this knowledge from Solon, his ancestor, who had traveled to Egypt, as many Greek sages of the 6th and 5th centuries BC did, and had found, in the temple of the goddess Neith at Sais, inscriptions recounting the story of Atlantis. Those inscriptions, it is said, were also personally seen by Proclus, who traveled to Sais to verify Solon's account and confirm their existence. The temple was later destroyed during the Christian era, and today a modern settlement stands on its site, with very limited archaeological investigation. Bizzi does not rule out the possibility that those inscribed columns still lie buried underground, awaiting rediscovery. For decades, the publication of these texts was considered inappropriate by the very custodians of the Eleusinian tradition for two main reasons. On the one hand, there was concern that materials subjected to numerous transcriptions and lacking the most ancient original versions might be misunderstood as objective proof of the events they describe. On the other, there was awareness that their content was not strictly initiatory and thus did not warrant secrecy within the framework of the mystery tradition. Only recently has authorization for publication been granted. In 2024, Aurora Boreal Edizioni, Bizzi's publishing house, began releasing the first volume of this extraordinary documentation. The work was edited by Bizzi together with Professor Guido Maria Stelvio Mariani of Costa San Severo, founder of the Eleusinian Studies Center Siderata and the 73rd Grandifanti in direct lineage, the highest living authority of the Eleusinian tradition. Bizzi is explicit about the epistemological limits of these texts. They do not constitute scientific proof. They cannot be verified through the methods of traditional archaeology or philology, and they should not be read as historical documents in the modern sense. Nevertheless, the sheer volume of information they contain, thousands of pages detailing geography, dynastic history, social structure, conflicts, and conquests, makes them, in his view, an extraordinary tool for reflection and comparison. They allow isolated fragments to be connected, offer possible answers to long-standing historical questions, and invite a reconsideration of entire chapters of human prehistory in a new light. The correspondences with Norse mythology in the names of the islands, the link between Lake Triton and Athena, the Innic origin of the pyramid, the rainfall erosion of the Sphinx, the pre-colonization of Egypt. All these elements are woven together by the Eleusinian texts into a coherent framework, without ever being able to provide the certainty demanded by historiography. Not proof, then, but a perspective, that of a previous cycle of civilization, one that may have left its imprint across cultures separated by vast distances, in a web of echoes and correspondences that, whatever their origin, continues to challenge anyone who approaches the great enigma of Atlantis with seriousness and intellectual curiosity. Whether Atlantis was real, symbolic, or something in between, one thing remains undeniable. The question is still open. See you in the next episode of Saturday Classics, here on Compelling Topics.
I went to